All right, I know the inverse functions lesson was already kind of long by itself, so I wanted to save the word problems for its own separate day. And I wanted to add more than just one word problem, just so you got experience with a couple of them. So you should have a new page of notes that has 2 word problems on it. And then this one's going to be a much quicker one just because we want to go through just these 2 lessons, or these 2 problems. So first one, it says Carter sells paper supplies and makes a base salary of $2,200 each month. He also earns 5% commission. Well, 5% is 0.05 as a decimal, based on how much he sells. So his total earnings, f of x, so the function in terms of x for a month, which he compiled x dollars in total sales, is f of x equals 2,200 plus 0.05x. So in this case, they've written the function for me. So one of the things I want to focus on is, what do each of those represent? Well, right now, x is his total sales, and then f of x, another name for f of x is y, is his total income, his total earnings. Okay. So right now, x is how much did he sell, and y, or f of x, is his total earnings. So part A says write the inverse. Well, right now it's f of x equals 2,200, his base salary, plus 5% times his sales. Well, f of x is really just y, so y is equal to 2,200 plus 0.05x. And then we want to find the inverse, so we're going to switch the x and the y. We're going to change what's my input and what's my output. So now it's going to become x equals 2,200 plus 0.05y. So just like yesterday, now we rewrite the equation in terms of y. So I'm going to subtract the 2,200 from both sides and move that over. So I get x minus 2,200 is equal to 0.05y. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the math. So this step actually has 2 different options for us. We can divide both sides by 0.05. And actually, I'm going to rewrite that a little bit differently here. And instead do it underneath of each side, 0.05 and times 0.05. So I get y is equal to x minus 2,200 divided by 0.05. Now, you are welcome to leave it in that form in these word problems, because sometimes the next step can be a little bit easier if it's left in this larger form. But if not, you can go ahead and do your dividing. And this is where you can think about this one a little bit different. 0.05 is the same thing as 1/20th. So you could think of this as 1/20th y. So you could think of it as, I'm really doing the opposite. I want to multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm really multiplying times 20 over 1. That's the same thing as dividing by 0.05, because that's really 1/20th. So I multiply by my reciprocal, 20 over 1. So I get 20 times x minus 2,200, or 20x minus 44,000. I'm okay with either one of those because they're basically going to give me the same thing. And then I can rewrite it as f inverse of x is 20x minus 44,000. Okay? But here's where question B comes in. So we've rewritten our function by switching the x and the y. We've put it into inverse function form. And now we want to know what that x and that f inverse of x represents. Well, they basically have flip-flopped from what they originally were. So if you remember up here, we said x is the total sales and f of x was the total earnings. Well, remember, we switched those. So now x is the total earnings, and f inverse is his total sales. How much did he sell? So basically, we rewrote this equation so that we could plug in his total income and work backwards to figure out, okay, how much sales would he have to have in order to get to that point? So we can go ahead and do that. They say, well, what if his total earnings was $34.50? Well, that's X in my new function. So F inverse of $34.50 is 20 times $34.50 minus $44,000. Well, 20 times $34.50 gives me this for his total minus the $44,000. And he needs to have $25,000 in sales in order to meet that earnings. So if he had $25,000 in sales times 5% for his commission, plus the $2,200, and that would get us to our $34.50. So it allows us to rewrite this equation so we can work it backwards. We can instead plug in the total amount and work it backwards to figure out what he must have had in sales. All right, so let's see that in another one. It says Jenny is running in a charity event. One donor is paying an initial amount of $20 plus an extra $5 for every mile that Jenny runs. So write a function, donations in terms of X, for the total donations for X miles. Well, we know we're going to get $20 plus $5 times the number of miles. And they said use X for the number of miles. So 20 plus 5X. That's my original. So X is my number of miles. D of X is the total donation. That's the original function. Now we're going to write the inverse. Well, if D of X is equal to 20 plus 5X, D of X is really Y. So that's 20 plus 5X is equal to Y. Now I'm going to flip my X and my Y. So X is equal to 20 plus 5Y. And we solve in terms of Y. So I'm going to subtract 20 from both sides and get X minus 20 is equal to 5Y. I'm going to write that over here so I got some room. Then I'm going to solve for Y by dividing by 5. And then here's where, particularly in the word problems, it's okay to leave it in two forms. We could either leave it as X minus 20 divided by 5 equals Y, or you can go ahead and actually divide each of them by 5 and get 1/5 X minus 4 is equal to Y. I'm okay with either one of those. And then our last step is we want to write it in function form. So we're going to rewrite it as D inverse of X is X minus 20 over 5, or D inverse of X is equal to 1/5 X minus 4. And it's up to you which of those forms you use depending on what the next part of a question might ask. And then the last part for this one just wants to know, okay, what does X and D inverse of X now represent? Because remember, we switched them from what they were originally up here. Whoop. Oh, sorry, my screen got a little crazy on me there. So now my X is the total donations, and D inverse of X is the number of miles. So we can now use this new function to plug in the total donations and work it backwards to figure out, okay, how many miles would they have to run in order to earn that amount of money? All right, hopefully that gives you an idea of how to use these inverse functions with our word problems. And now it's going to be your turn to give it a try.